Hello Year 9 and welcome to this brief video for me to explain your tasks for today, Thursday the 12th of November on An Inspector Calls. As you might have guessed from where we read up to last week, we have already read about Sheila's involvement. So today's lesson will focus on Gerald, what Gerald does to the girl, what Gerald's role is with regards to the girl's suicide. It'll also talk you through some principles of his character and also give you a brief overview and a chance to sort of show off what you've understood with regards to Gerald's personality, behaviour and attitudes. This video does have a voiceover, which hopefully you are now listening to. I will not pause the video myself, and I will not tell you when to pause. But what I will do is I will sort of stop talking after each task. At that point, you can pause and sort of catch the video on the correct slides. The slides are available on Microsoft Teams and they are listed as an assignment. You will need to access a PDF of the text, which will look different to what the text looks like in school, but the text and the writing and the words is exactly the same. And I will show you on the slides whereabouts you need to go to access the correct parts, because the page numbers won't add up. The last bullet point is that during your timetabled lesson time, so period 1 tomorrow, Thursday, I'm recording this Wednesday night, by the way, period 1 on Thursday and period 1 on Friday, I will have Teams open on my laptop whilst I'm teaching the same lesson to the rest of the students that are not self-isolating, so that if you need to ask me any questions, that is the time to do it, and I will respond as quickly as I can. So the point of today's lesson is to start to understand how Priestley presents Gerald and uses Gerald to guide an audience's response. So in the same way as we've done with Mr. Burling and with Sheila, how is the audience guided to condemn Mr. Burling? How is the audience guided to judge Sheila and her jealous actions? We're going to have a look today at the tools that we need to be able to do that for Gerald. So the first task is to sort of review what Gerald's character is like up to now, okay? So a bit of a skimming and scanning task really, this first task. What you need to do is have a look back through Act 1 and select 3 quotations that match the adjectives below. So it's just one quotation for each adjective, okay? And these all link to Gerald. And I'd also like you to explain, it doesn't have to be paragraphs and paragraphs, it can be 2 to 3 sentences of explanation about how Gerald, how the adjective, matches to the quotation that you are going to pick out for Gerald. So you've got insincere, a capitalist, and lacks empathy with the working class. So you can pause the video now and you can use the PDF version of An Inspector Calls to go back through Act 1 and look at what Gerald says and decide which quotations might work for those adjectives below. Okay, this task should take you about 10 minutes. You can pause now. Okay, now assuming that you've done that task, you've got a bit of an idea for what Gerald is like as a character. There's some key ideas about Gerald that you need to be aware of before we continue, okay? We don't know what Gerald has done to the girl yet because we haven't read it yet, okay? But the fact that he's in the play and the fact that the inspector engages with him and the fact that he is a key part of the Burling family, if you will, being engaged to Sheila, we obviously know by now that Gerald will have his turn to be questioned by the inspector. Gerald is part of the upper class, privileged capitalist section of society. So, as we've mentioned in lesson, Gerald is more privileged and more upper class than what the Burlings are. Gerald's parents, known as Lord and Lady Croft, members of the nobility of the aristocracy. So they are the Croft family are much more wealthy and more affluent than the Burlings. Gerald is, however, a complicated character. We don't really know what to feel about him so far. He seems kind and empathetic, but he also seems like he he pushes forward the agenda of the patriarchy. You know, he treats Sheila as if she's below him. He's quite condescending to Sheila at certain times. If you remember, when Sheila says, "Is it?" When Gerald gives Sheila the ring, and Sheila replies by saying, "Is it the one you wanted me to have?" It gives us a bit of an indication as to the kind of values that Gerald ascribes to in society, and the kind of values that Gerald fits in with in society. So, if, you know, he's the kind of character that will definitely be closer to the views of Mr. Burling, in terms of, you know, being patriarchal, in terms of being quite dismissive, lacking an understanding for the troubles of the working class. So he's much closer and much more closely aligned to Mr. Burling than he is to Sheila. Task 2 is a really short task, actually. It should only take you a few minutes. I'd like you to read to the end of Act 1 as per the PDF link on slide 1. Now, this screenshot at the bottom is where I'd like you to start from, because that's where we read up to in the play in class. So I'd like you to find the text that's below, which is towards the end of Act 1, and I'd like you to take some time now, please, to read it through. So you can pause the slide and read through until the end of Act 1, please. Okay, so hopefully you've read to the end of Act 1, and you'll notice at the end of Act 1, I'm looking at the second bullet point on your screen now. At the end of Act 1, Priestley freezes the characters on stage. So at this point, the curtain would come down. If you're watching this on stage, the curtain would come down, and the audience would be left with a few questions as to Gerald's involvement with Eva Smith, who's now known as, he knew her as Daisy Renton. It's the same girl. She just changed her name in between her being sacked from her job at Millwards to starting a relationship with Gerald, as you'll find out very shortly. What Priest is able to do is he's able to include a long pause in which the audience is left to sort of come up with their own view on Gerald. And the really important part here is that by using this freeze frame, Priest is able to make it really clear to the audience that Gerald chooses the option to deceive and to lie where possible. It's almost like the pause at the end of Act 1 is almost like buying Gerald some time to decide what lie he's going to tell, and then we have to make a decision as to whether we trust Gerald or not. Okay? And just to clarify at the end, which I know some of you asked me last week in lesson, Gerald did know Eva Smith, but he knew her as Daisy Renton, okay, because that's what she changed her name to. So moving on, what I'd now like you to do is read from the start of Act 2 up to the section below. So I've tried to be as helpful as possible. There's an arrow there that points to the bit I'd like you to read up to. And this is kind of like the end of Gerald's section, if you will, where we find out what Gerald does, and we find out how Gerald and Sheila, how Sheila really responds to finding out about Gerald. This will take you about 10 to 15 minutes. If you wanted to watch it, there are some versions on YouTube. It's quite simple. Just type into YouTube an Inspector Calls play, and you can find the bit just at the start of Act 2 where the curtain is pulled back up again. If you wanted to read this alongside a play version, a visual version of the play, because the film is not available on YouTube, but you might find a version of the play that matches this text. Okay, you can pause now and read up to Act 2, where Sheila says, "Yes, but you don't believe me, and this is just the wrong time not to believe me." Okay, so coming back in then leads us to, this is actually task 4, that's a typo, I'd apologise for that. Task 4, if we include, the reading Act 2 as task 3. What I'd like you to do is write an explanation of what Gerald does to the girl. I'd like to focus on his actions, his behaviour and his attitude, especially linking back to those adjectives at the start. Do we see Gerald in a different light, for example, as to how we see him at the start? Does Priestley guide us to condemn Gerald? Does Priestley guide us to empathise with Gerald? And if you're really stuck, there is a sneak peek that you can have on the next slide of what Gerald did to the girl. Okay, what I would do is I'd pause the video now. I would go through, I'd go back through Act 2, I'd find some evidence and I'd put together an explanation, importantly thinking about our connectives and words that we use to justify our ideas, because, therefore, so, as, given that, those kind of key pieces of vocabulary that we'd used when we were explaining, and explain what Gerald did to the girl, but try and focus on how an audience would perceive Gerald, and how he fits into this idea of the patriarchy, upper class, sort of privileged male, if you will. Okay, so you can pause now, unless you are stuck, in which case you can have a sneak peek on the next slide. Okay, so that's the example that you can use if you're stuck. It's quite a basic example to give you the sort of the core knowledge, but ultimately that tells you what happened between Gerald and the girl. There's always a bit of a not controversy, but always a bit of a disagreement here among students in the classroom when we read this part, because a lot of students think that what Gerald was doing was really kind to her, although I'd argue, and a lot of students would argue and have argued, is that actually Gerald knew, Gerald was leading her along, and then when it didn't suit him, he drops her at the last minute and goes back to his life with Sheila. So forgetting the fact that Gerald has cheated on Sheila with Daisy Renton / Eva Smith, he took advantage of Daisy Renton because it suited him. And then when he couldn't do it anymore, he then let go of her, which obviously would have contributed to a suicide. You've got to kind of think about the emotional roller coaster that Daisy Renton would have gone on here. Sort of the feeling accepted and appreciated by Gerald, to then feeling sort of rejected by Gerald, to then getting used to a lifestyle where she had a roof over her head, and she had somebody there for her, to all of a sudden sort of overnight those kind of luxuries being taken away from her. So really try and consider that in your approach here. The last task, you don't need to write anything down for this unless you want to. You've got kind of a collection of adjectives on the page here to describe Gerald's character. Now, you can simply just discuss this in your own head and think through each adjective and think whether it's relevant or not and which one would best describe Gerald. But you can as well, and I know you will be in touch with people in the group via WhatsApp, or text. Do people even send text messages anymore? I don't know. Snapchat maybe. But you can do this as a peer activity. You can do these tasks in a sort of like peer activity. It's just that I can't facilitate that through Teams at the moment. But you can do it as a pair, or using the lesson time instead if you want to, because it's quite helpful to get different people's perspectives on this. Okay, and as you're doing that, I would like you to complete the following very short task. You don't have to write a lot. An oracy task, oracy being the use of voice and speech to reason and discuss. If you can just summarise your four of your discussion points onto the page. If you've not done this with anybody and you've done this as on your own, you can just sort of summarise what you discussed with yourself in your head, really. And I'll have a quick look at those and provide you with some feedback over the next few weeks. In terms of further resources, I know that you've logged on to GCSE Pod. If you've got any issues logging in, Mr. Chatton's the best person to speak to. I do apologise for that weird and hashtag 39. When I copied it over, for some reason, it changed the quotation marks for some reason, so just ignore that. But I have put a link at the bottom to a GCSE pod, which is 4 minutes long, and it talks you through Gerald Croft as a character. So I really, really would advise you to look at that and watch it if you're stuck, because I think I can talk you through these tasks and I can give you a bit of advice. And you can watch the film and you can do the reading, but the GCSE pod breaks it down in a really easy to follow way, with animations as well. So I would suggest that if you do have any doubts at all about Gerald's character. Okay, not tomorrow's lesson, because it's Wednesday, I apologise. Friday the 13th, unlucky for some, you may say. Friday the 13th lesson will look at Gerald in a bit more detail. There'll be a little bit more focus on analysis, a bit more focus on what Gerald is allegorical for, and a bit of a response to a statement with regards to what Gerald did to the girl, to Daisy Renton, and how we judge him based on that. As I said, if you've got any questions during the lesson slot, which is 9:10 until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, period 1, then please post them in the chat on Teams and I will respond. And don't forget, it's not just me. You're a very clever, very able class, and I'm sure other people in the class will be able to help you if you get stuck as well. Okay? That's it for now, and I will speak to you again on Friday. Have a lovely, lovely Thursday. And I miss you all very much. It was very strange this morning in lesson, teaching the same sort of thing but to 6 students. It was certainly something that I didn't like as much as what I like when I have everybody in the lesson together. Bye for now.